Welcome everybody to the commission meeting. Before we get started, I would like to just express, I think on behalf of the commission, a special thanks. One, to the CJC and Chris for what you guys have done to help coordinate the meetings. It's been absolutely phenomenal. Two, to the members of the commission. You guys have been great through this process, and you know, your guidance and counsel, I think, through the rest of the process will be just absolutely important. To the consulting team, Howard and Jim, you guys and your team have been, I mean, considering the time frame and all of the work that's gone into this. You know, when we started, I said that this was an all-star team, and it certainly has turned out to be that. So thank you, and for the work that you've done. And I know for the good that's going to come out of this. To Chief Cummings, you guys have been phenomenal. You know, we talked the other day about how much you've been through in terms of the VRN and the HIDA and the Safe Streets, and I don't know how you've done it. And certainly the support that you've given this commission has been absolutely phenomenal. The other note, I did say this last time, but I do want to repeat it on a personal note, and then I'm going to invite the commission members to make an opening comment. To me, this has been about a number of things. One is, I think, from the governor's standpoint, the responsibility that the state of Delaware has to have in conjunction with Wilmington in reducing the incidence of violence. It's been that about me, and I think certainly working over the last 2 months with the consultants, that's how it's turned out to be. We all, I think everybody here bears some responsibility for that, and I think that we need to continue to ensure that that responsibility is met. But I think most of all, it's been about the people of the city of Wilmington and the children in Wilmington, and I hope that what you'll hear tonight will help. I think it'll provide, at least in some way, some ideas and a blueprint for the future. And I think that that's been just one of the good things to come about. The other thing is, and I said this the last time, it's a belief, certainly in Chief Cummings, and it's a belief in the men and women of the Wilmington Police Department. We owe them this, and I think we owe them the support that the state and everyone in Delaware needs to have. So based on that, it's been a privilege over the last 2 months to get to work with everybody here. I would now invite my co-chair, Joe, to say an opening, and then we'll turn it over to the commission members for that.
Thank you, sir. Good evening, all. I have to echo that what the Secretary has stated. The work done by our consultants, the work by the commission, the input from the community has been outstanding. And we really appreciate it. I'm sure it's going to make a difference at the end of the day. No matter what the plan, no matter what you think about the plan, at the end of the day, it's all about the person that's in charge of this police organization. If he's strong, if he has the support of his personnel, if he's willing to take information, advice, support from others, if he can get the folks around him to support him both inside and outside the organization, he'll be successful. And all those things that we want as members of this community will come to fruition. The crime rate will go down. You'll have you know, a better place to live. The last session I was at, and I'll be really quick about this, there were so many good things talked about by all these different groups throughout this city. There are so many good things that are going on. And it just makes me feel like we could make a difference. So to Bobby Cummings, who I think is a great guy, great leader, strong leader, he has great support throughout this state. Whatever it takes, we're going to make it happen. We're going to support you however we can. So to the commissioners, thank you all for being a part of this. Thank you very much.
Sure, and you know, they haven't left much unsaid here that I couldn't echo. Everybody here has been really dedicated, and I too join in commending Chief Cummings for having such an open door and an open mind, and it's been really a pleasure to do this, and not many people would have been as gracious in allowing a peek inside their organization as you have been. So we're looking forward, I'm really looking forward to hearing the recommendations tonight and to hearing from the members of the community about what they see as the path forward.
All right, good evening, everyone. Real quick, I'd just like to say I thank the community for being involved in this process. I thank all the commission members, and then I'd really like to thank the consultant groups that came in. Not only have we opened our doors to them, but they've also been tremendous, and the suggestions, the communications that we've had with them while they were here with us, they really took a look at our department from a professional standpoint to make sure that what we're looking to carry forward, that those suggestions will be admirable for this city and us carrying out our public safety mission. So again, I'd like to thank them. Again, they have a lot of experience. I'm pretty new at the position. They brought a lot with them and conveyed a lot of things to me. And I think they will be great partners also moving forward, as they indicated that if there was any help needed, they would be willing to, take a few phone calls for free, maybe one or two. So again, thank you.
Rick, present.
Good evening, everybody. I just want to say thank you for all of your support. This community really did come out in a very big way to try to participate in this and to try to support this effort and to try to support Chief Cummings here. When I first started on this, I think one of the things that I said in an earlier comment was that I thought that this commission and just its formation was really a hopeful thing for the city of Wilmington. And I think that now that we've gotten to this report and we've gotten to this, it feels even more hopeful. So I'm really grateful for everybody's effort and really grateful for all of your support for getting this done. Thank you.
Jim?
Good evening, everyone. The one thing that you've heard thus far from everybody on the panel is that the interaction from the community. And almost all the meetings that we've attended, the community has have come out and they've voiced their concerns. And the one thing I will tell you is that in talking with the consultants, I think they've picked up on most of the things that the community is saying. And what they've tried to do is incorporate that in their recommendations as part of this report. And the final thing that I will tell you is that we're all here tonight because we're concerned about the future of the city of Wilmington. And that's the bottom line. And hopefully, when we share the recommendations from this report, you'll be able to see that that's what we're striving to do. And we want to make a difference, and we know that you want to make a difference. So as a team effort, it's all of us together. And that's why we're here tonight. Thank you.
Thank you.
Good evening, everyone. And I, too, want to extend my heartfelt thanks to the consultants who have guided us through this process. I feel like they've become my new best friends. and all of the members of the commission, and I'm sure the Wilmington Police Department. I also want to thank the chief. I cannot imagine a leader who would be as open as this man has been to change, to improving the plight of everybody in this city. And he wants to fix things, and we can't ask for more than that. And he is so open to ideas about how to do it. Special thanks to Sergeant Ash, I'm going to embarrass you, who spent hours and hours and hours, sometimes into the early morning hours, gathering all of the information that needed to be gathered in this process, in this very thorough process. Thank you. I've had the pleasure to work with investigators in the police department, patrol officers, community officers, and I have to say, I am honored because they are some of the finest human beings and dedicated public servants I have ever worked with, and I consider myself very lucky. At the end of the day, as everyone on the commission has said, It's about the people we serve. So if this report and our work as we go forward, and we're not done, this is stage one, but as we go forward, if our work can improve the lives of the people in this city, and we all love this city, being born and raised here, then we're doing our job, because it's all about the people we serve, and you have come forward and your voice has been heard in this report. So thank you for that.
Oh, the beauty of going last is that usually the good sound bites are usually taken up by now. But let me first talk about the community, which traditionally in Wilmington has been underserved, underrepresented segment of our population at these meetings. And to echo Ms. Jennings, Kathy, my best friend too, her comment was that we are serving, or we are ambassadors to people who really don't have access to these kind of meetings. And I think that the consultants have done a marvelous job of actually addressing their concerns and their issues. I got the report earlier today and I read through it, and I was excited, and I was overjoyed of how you guys actually captured their concerns and their issues in this report. So my hats off to you guys. The second thing is Chief Cummings. I wouldn't expect nothing else from the class that you have exhibited, the professionalism, the style in which you endured this whole entire process only goes to show, and has proven to me as I've grown to know you more and more, that they couldn't have picked a better chief for this task, a better person. My new friend, the National Police Foundation, I had the chance to get to grow to know you guys too. We met at different venues, and I'm just excited about this report right here. And like I always say, if we can back this report up with some implementation, some application, then I think that this right here can serve us in a great way. Thank you guys for coming up tonight.
Thank you very much. Just one quick administrative note. We do have to approve the minutes from the last meeting. Hopefully everybody's had a chance to look at that.
I move approval.
Do we have a second? All in favor? And another just quick announcement. Tonight we do have the victim advocates that are available to help if you need them. They are here to offer support and to make sure that if you are a victim of a crime, that you are connected with the resources that we do have in Delaware. They are positioned around the back of the room. I'll ask them to stand up if they would and raise their hand. Okay. They do have name tags, and they are from the Criminal Justice Council. They have information with them should you need to avail yourself of that. Now to the moment that we have all been waiting for. It does seem like it's been a year, but it's only actually been a little over 2 months. I know the work that has gone into that. Bear in mind, too, that the commission members themselves were not aware of the recommendations until yesterday. So I know, Howard and Jim, that you will entertain, as the presentation goes on, I'm sure there will be questions, and that's fine. So without any further ado, however you guys want to go about it.
Thank you. Jim and I wanted to come up together to begin with to thank Chief Cummings and the Commission. And I have done this in many cities, and I have never been with a chief who has been more open, more flexible, more gracious than Chief Cummings. And you will hear some things from us tonight that sound like they might be criticisms. They're not. What they are what we believe are best practices. None of them are personalized. They are all about trying to make the department better in reducing crime and dealing with the community. We believe that the Wilmington Police Department is full of great people who are dedicated and committed. And we also believe that if they follow most of the recommendations that we've made, it will end up in a significant reduction in crime and violence in the city. And we believe that Chief Cummings is the chief to lead that department on this roadmap. So, Jim?
Howard, thank you. And I obviously share all of Howard's comments. And Wolfie, there was one talking point that I have that no one else hit, so I have the pleasure of sharing that. Not only was Chief Cummings incredibly open, and for anybody who has run an agency and had people come in from the outside to look at what you're doing, you know how daunting that can be. And I think it's a natural tendency for anyone to not want to let go of information or provide access. The chief did the exact opposite. He opened the doors, he welcomed in the VRI team who spent most of their time working with the police department. He also welcomed our team as well. But not only that, what we noticed about the chief as we talked to him and his command staff and officers about the issues that we were seeing and about potential ways to address those problems, we began to see in follow-up meetings that action had already been taken in those areas. And to us, that's the best sign of progress and potential that you could hope for, is to see an agency listen to what you're saying before a finding and a recommendation is even issued and begin to take steps to address that issue immediately. That's a sign of leadership, and that's a sign of somebody who's taking the process very seriously and wants to improve the agency, as the chief has said throughout these meetings. So we want to thank you for that. We also want to share our thanks for the community, for all of the people, hundreds of people who have come to each of these community meetings to share your comments and your feedback, but also to those people who have taken time out of their weekends to meet with us at various places, Dr. Thomas, meet with us at various places around the community to share your concerns and take that chance with us, people from the outside, to share your views and your concerns as openly as you did was a tremendous sign. Like with the chief, the other thing that really struck me about Wilmington was not only the people that were willing to come forward and talk about their concerns, but the number of people who stepped forward and said, I'm willing to help. I'm willing to take action. I'm willing to do something to make my community a better place. And I can tell you, as Howard says, having spent 20 years with the United States Department of Justice, traveling around the country, going to a lot of communities, there are many places where the trust is so broken, the people are not willing to offer that. They've given up. Wilmington has not given up. And that's made very clear through this process. And it's made clear through the findings that we provide to you in our report. And I think you'll see that as it becomes public. There were many people in the community that shared concerns, but those people were very quick to say, I also appreciate the police and the role that they play, and I want public safety, and I'm willing to play a role in that. So thank you to the community, not only the residents, but also the business leaders, to the agency heads and the staff that we met with. We took your time. Some of you, we took your lunchtime. We appreciate you spending the time with us. And then last but not least, thanks to the CJC, who in many ways became the unpaid consultants in this process, supporting and staffing us throughout as we tried to spend as much time here in Delaware as we could. So with that, thank you all, and I'll turn it over to Howard.
One of the things we want to say at the beginning, that you will hear a number of recommendations which seem to ask for additional resources and additional people. And what we're recommending, we believe, can be paid for by savings in overtime based on our realignment of certain positions, as well as from federal grants and realignments. So don't think that we're recommending lots of new people and lots of more money, because we're really not. What we're recommending, we believe, can be accomplished within the resources that currently exist. So the first thing we looked at, we have heard from the community and from the press and from others that there is a lack of police presence and we need a lot more police officers. And we looked at the ratio of police officers to citizens in Wilmington, and believe it or not, it's one of the highest in the country. There, we believe, are adequate police officers to police the city. We think there are probably some ways to fix that. We also believe that Chief Cummings, who instituted a 3-sector program, has instituted a correct organizational program, but we think it needs a little tweaking. And what we believe is, a while back, lieutenants were moved to administrative positions and basically off the street. And we believe that they should be returned to their sectors and their platoons, and they should really be in charge of allocation of overtime, and should be really the first line supervision with the sergeants on the street, for more police presence, and more accountability. At the same time, one of the things, again, that we've heard is where the cars are, where the patrol cars are, and Wilmington has recently gotten a new computer-assisted dispatch system, which will give Chief Cummings and his command staff the ability through GPS tracking to know where all their cars are. And by doing that, not only will they be able to hold police officers accountable for where they are and what they're doing, but they'll be able to allocate resources much more effectively. If something is happening in Sector 2 and it's quiet in Sector 1, they'll know exactly where their cars are, and they'll be able to move them in the right direction for better accountability. One of the things that Chief Cummings implemented recently was Operation Disrupt. Operation Disrupt is a focused enforcement effort in hotspots. It has, for the 2 months that it's been in operation, reduced shootings and homicides in the city. That's the good news. Unfortunately, it takes a tremendous amount of resources. And because of the resources it takes, Chief Cummings has had to take resources from investigative units, from community policing units, and we believe that Disrupt in its current form is not sustainable. Now, one of the things I mentioned about number of police officers, there are 320 allocated police officers in this city. Currently, there are 286. There are 34 in the academy right now. What we're recommending is based on those 34 coming out of the academy and supplementing the number of officers who are currently at 286. What we believe will happen then is we're recommending that there be what we've termed, and the chief can name it anything he wants, what we've termed a community stabilization unit of 8 officers and 1 sergeant that will be available to be moved by the command staff anywhere in the city to deal with hotspots, with incidents, or with just additional community policing as required. And along with the additional officers that are coming out of the academy that will be allocated to patrol, we will actually end up with the same number of officers out in the community as Disrupt has now, which is 22. So we believe that that will have a very positive effect in dealing with reduction in crime. And one of the things that we believe in as we looked at the department is there's 2 things that have to happen in Wilmington. The community has to gain trust and belief in their department. And 2, the criminals have to be afraid. They have to be afraid that if they commit crimes, they're going to get arrested. So they won't be carrying their guns. They won't be out there harassing people and committing crimes if they believe that there is a competent, well-equipped police force with good information that is doing what it needs to do to reduce crime. So with that, I'll let Jim talk a little bit about community policing, and then I'll come back and talk about investigations and homicides.
Thank you, Howard. The point I'm going to pick up on first is about overtime. I'll tell you a little bit more about that process. So the first thing that we all have to recognize is that I'm not aware of any police department in the country that operates without overtime. Overtime is a fact of life for law enforcement. Law enforcement is a 24/7 business. It can't always be planned for in the way we would like. We don't have the luxury in law enforcement to say we're not feeling well today, therefore we're not going to come to work. We've got to be on the streets because the public and the public safety depends on us. Therefore, overtime is always going to be a requirement. The question is, what amount of overtime spending is appropriate? And so that was what we really dug into with Wilmington Police Department. Every police department goes through a budgeting process and is allocated a certain portion of overtime spending. It's a natural part of the budgeting process. But what we found here is that there is a considerable amount of resources allocated to the Wilmington Police Department for unanticipated overtime, for overtime that wasn't budgeted as part of the process. And that was a concern for us. So we looked at other departments around the country, and one way you do that is you look at benchmarks. And there is a benchmark. There's a benchmarking process. There's 30 agencies that participate in various places in the U.S. To share some of their administrative data so that other agencies can look to see what, what amount of overtime spending is appropriate. The way they do that is they look at percent of the personnel budget that's allocated to overtime. So as those 30 agencies shared their data in fiscal year 13, they found that 3.5% of their personnel budget was allocated towards overtime. In Wilmington, we found that number for FY14 to be approximately 5.1%. So not a direct comparison, but clearly it shows that compared to those other agencies anyway, and that's a fairly good number of agencies, that the overtime spending is fairly high. We also found that the city spends more, and you'll see in our report, the city of Wilmington spends more on law enforcement generally than other cities spend. And that was another fact that came out of the benchmark study. But where the concern comes in again is the spending rate and the fact that it's unplanned. So in fiscal year 2014, we found $2.9 million in unanticipated overtime expenditures. In FY15, up until last week, it appears that, based on the figures we were provided, the police department had spent $2.6 million in overtime. So almost the same amount spent in this part of 2015 thus far as was spent in all of 2014. And so that's a concern. The reason why it's a concern is because if you take those dollars and you divide them by the salary and fringe rate of a police officer, for example, you could potentially, and this isn't how it works, but just to give you some idea of what the impact of this is, you could hire anywhere from 28 to 40 officers with that money. And we're not recommending that. It's just a point of comparison for you. What we are recommending, though, is that internal controls be enhanced within the police department to monitor overtime expenditures. So, for example, as Howard mentioned, having the lieutenants return back to the street with them approving overtime expenditures or use of overtime, with them being with the people who are actually using that overtime money, they should have a much better idea of whether or not it's truly needed at that point in time. Today, they're making that decision in a separate time and space from the people who are using it based on the information we were providing. So that was one internal control that we recommended strengthening. The other is we recommended that the chief be provided with regular data on where overtime is being requested, not only by individual officer but by unit, because the chief needs to know where those dollars are going and what they're needed for. And the reason for that is not necessarily because we suspect that there's some wrongdoing, but it's because if there is dollars being spent disproportionately for overtime in one part of the department, the chief has the opportunity to realign his deployment, his staffing, in order to reduce those overtime expenditures. So in order to manage that, he's got to be provided with the data on a real-time basis about overtime expenditures. So we did recommend some internal controls there. We also recommended some best practices. For example, the International Association of Chiefs of Police, the National Institute of Justice have both issued reports on how law enforcement agencies can better manage overtime funds, and we've referenced those in our study. Now, moving on, we heard a lot from the community about community policing. And one of the comments that we heard very clearly from the community is we want our community policing officers back. And not only do we want them back, we want them empowered to solve problems in the community, and we want them to stay with us for a longer period of time. And so we've made a lot of recommendations on the area of community policing, but this entire portion of our report is really informed by feedback from the community. And so Dr. Dave Thomas collected that feedback. I'd like him to come up and tell you a little bit more about what we've heard from the community and how we've responded to that based on what's in these recommendations. Dr. How's everyone doing?
Okay. One thing that, before I even get started, I want the community to know, because they were adamant about me telling the story, your story. And what you won't find when you look at the report is you'll see the summary that you all have now. But your story was told, and it was told as I got it, and it was told as about as raw as I could make it, but the story was told because I think it was important that you be heard. So the other thing that I'll say before we move with that is that we also recognize that other contributors to this crime problem. And we talk about education, we talk about jobs, we talk about job training, but for us, we can look at that as a contributor, and we listed those issues. But for our role here, that's not our primary role, and it deals with everything that has to do with police. So, first of all, as Jim said, with community policing, it was a tale of two cities. One part of the community could tell us, man, we want our community officers, we love them, we want them here. African American side of the community would tell me, don't know who they are, can't give you a name. And so the one thing that I'll say that needs to be understood is that if we're going to do community policing, that is equally dispensed across the entire community, not just in some areas where they get one form of policing and another area where they get a different thing. The other thing, as Jim talked about, he mentioned about empowerment. In places where I've worked, and I've been a community police officer, the one thing that we always had the ability to do is pick up the phone, and if you got a street light out, we could call and say, hey, we could get somebody to fix the light. If we had trash issues, whatever the issue might be, we had that luxury to be able to pick up the phone and make that call, and have something done within 24 hours. What we found, and even when we talked to the officers, is that there are layers of bureaucracy. And so those layers have to be removed in order for those officers to be effective. And they'll talk about it, they'll get more into their deployment plan, how the community police officers should be utilized, but that is essential, and those things are essential. Enhancing trust and legitimacy to gain community support. That's an interesting concept, and the reality is that there's two groups of people that are disenfranchised. One group is the community, and again, I'll go back. It's the minority community that had the biggest beat. And time after time, every place I went, everybody I talked to, the complaints were the same. And that's that they felt that the police didn't value them as citizens of this community. And if there was a homicide shooting, the comments that were made at the homicide or shooting by the officers were disrespectful. And so that became very apparent that that process has to change in order for, I need you to help me, we need each other. And so that in order for that partnership to take place, that process has to change. The other side of that coin is the officers. And I'm not talking about the brass, I'm talking about the guys that you deal with on a daily basis. They're kind of disenfranchised because they don't feel that they have a voice in the organization. There's no buy-in. Things come from top down, don't necessarily go from bottom up, and there's not a meeting in the middle. And I know it's a paramilitary organization, but the reality is that that should happen. Because those guys working every day, they know exactly what's going on in their sectors, their patrol zones, they know that. They know what they need. And so for it to be an effective give and take, that has to take place. And so that was one of the other issues that we found. Without a buy-in, the rest of it is kind of lost. Okay? And then finally, the complaint process. Every meeting I went to, and it started downtown all the way out, is that when citizens make complaints, they don't feel that they have the ability to make a legitimate complaint or their complaint is heard. So if I want to go downtown, this is what I have to do after. Go to the station, I have to file a formal complaint. Those hours are between Monday through Friday from 8 to 5. Okay? Sometimes it was mentioned that while I'm making that complaint, or I'm there to make the complaint, the officer that I want to complain against, I'm walking through the lobby of the police department. So what we recommended is that they take and possibly move internal affairs out of the station, move it to another location, so that citizens could feel free to walk in and have their complaint taken without having that conflict. There's also a recommendation there that they consider allowing the complaints to be taken online, so that it would be much easier for someone to be able to do that. So those are the issues. When I looked at the community and talked, I mean, I have a ton of them. I mean, I could go on to infinitum, and when you get to the report and you get to the part about community, you'll see there's a ton of stuff. But those are the primary things that we pulled out of the hearing. Thank you.
Thank you, Dave. And I'll just round out a couple of things on that. So in terms of community policing, just to make sure that everyone is aware that there are community-oriented policing officers who are designated. This is their sort of full-time role, and it has existed as a separate unit. The BRI team will talk about some potential realignment there that we think is important for problem solving. But in addition to those officers, one of the things we say in the report, the recommendation that we make, is that community policing must be a philosophy throughout the entire department. And so it can't be just a few people with a specialized role that are assigned in hotspots around the community. It really has to be everyone's responsibility. And the way that works is police officers really have two special powers: the power of arrest, the power to solve problems in the community, particularly those problems that are related to crime and disorder.
And that's what we talk about in the report. We make some recommendations for training. We make some recommendations for policy changes to reinforce that. And as Dave mentioned, we make recommendations to put those community policing officers in the places where they are most needed based on the crime data that we have seen. We provided the department with an analysis of crime and calls for service for the last 5 years, last full 5 years, so up until the end of 2014. We provided that analysis from Temple University. And I think you'll be able to see that report in our document, and there's actually a video presentation of it as well that we're going to try to make available to you. By the way, those community policing officers, when they are assigned, we make the recommendation that they not be moved for a minimum of 1 year so that they have the opportunity to build those relationships and make change within that community before they are reassigned. Howard?
Homicide investigations are very complex, and one of the things that we looked at was how homicide investigations are investigated in the city. And the first thing we looked at was initial response. And what we found and heard from both police officers and the community is that the response is inconsistent. And one of the things that we're recommending is that for homicides that an inspector, which is a high-ranking officer within the department, respond to every homicide, and that captains respond to every shooting. We think this is important for both command and control of complex crime scenes, as well as a signal to the community as how important these incidents are. We looked at the homicide squad that was created, which had 5 investigators. And it is our opinion that based on the current caseload, that 5 investigators in homicide is not near enough. So what we're recommending is a homicide and violence prevention unit that would be a captain, 2 sergeants, and 16 officers, and that they would be trained investigators, which brings me to an issue that we think has to be addressed, which is currently there is not really a detective career track within the Wilmington Police Department. We believe that violent crime, especially homicides, need trained, experienced detectives who do not rotate in and out of patrol and investigation. So we are recommending that this homicide and violence prevention unit be staffed by people who are going to be in the investigative track unless they get promoted to a higher rank within the uniform division or retire. And we believe that that is very important. We're also recommending that there be a case management system, an automated case management system, be put into this unit so that cases can be tracked very specifically and very carefully as they go along. Unfortunately, at this point in time, Wilmington has a relatively low clearance rate on homicides. For the last year, and again, all numbers can be interpreted by different people, but as best we can tell, the homicide clearance rate last year was 14.3%. The national average is 64%. We believe a lot of that is a result not of dedication or hard work, but as a result of just not training, experience, and using automation.
The other area that is very much related to this, and as you all know, the difference, there's not much difference sometimes between homicides and shootings. They are all attended homicides, right? And so we looked at the way in which gun crimes are investigated, even in cases where there is no victim or there's no homicide, but it is a shooting. If a firearm is recovered, for example, in places like New Jersey, there are multiple steps that are taken with those recovered firearms. Those steps are completed within a period of 24 hours. And information as a result of that testing, for example, is returned very rapidly to the detectives that are handling that case and other cases such as homicides. Because the information that we can get from those firearms is often very important and can help us solve cases, connect cases that we didn't know were connected,
and connect those cases to an individual shooter that needs to be dealt with before they actually do hit someone with those shots. And so we recommended that the state of Delaware actually consider replicating what the state of New Jersey has done and requiring all law enforcement agencies to take these steps within a 24-hour period. If that can't be done on a legislative basis, we've recommended that the Wilmington Police Department consider implementing that protocol internally in conjunction with the Delaware State Police so that that information can be brought back much more rapidly. The other thing that happened in this process is we heard very clearly and in ways that was hard to frankly not address from the community. In particular, we had at a number of our commission meetings, we had family members of homicide victims who came forward to say they had great concerns about the way in which their case was handled, the communication between them and either the police department or another entity. And what we really took from that was that victim services can't end at the point in which the crime scene ends. Victim services have to continue throughout the entire process, and not only for purposes of providing that support for the trauma that those people are dealing with, but also because it's an important part, as Dave talked about earlier, gaining legitimacy, gaining trust in the eyes of the community, being there for those people, and because, frankly, those people sometimes have the best information that we can get so that we can solve that case. So we've got to make sure that we have a very strong relationship with crime victims, particularly in cases involving homicide. And what we recommend is that the department undertake a review of its communication practices with crime victims and its support practices with crime victims to make sure that if a survivor of a homicide victim contacts the police department, they should ideally be contacted within 24 hours to address whatever needs they have. They should be provided with victim support services, and we note that we did hear from a number of people that the police department has some very good victim advocates. It's really a question about the communication that takes place within the department and the extent to which they are able to stay with those crime victims throughout the process. Additionally, you heard Howard talk about a response plan and making sure that command staff are on scene at homicides to make sure that things are being done correctly and completely. We also recommend that crime victim advocates also be available to respond to homicides as well, because that is especially where they are needed. And so support to crime victims was definitely recommended, and in particular in our report, we expressed appreciation to the Brooks and Sellers family and to all crime victims in Wilmington for bringing this issue forward so that we can help the police department address it. The last point that I'll make here is that Wilmington has implemented some fantastic programs to address violence in the community. Not police programs necessarily, but community-based violence prevention programs. In fact, there's a history of implementing some of these programs in the past, and I name them, but it may not make sense for everybody, but apparently what's happened is they haven't been implemented fully, or when they have been implemented, they've eventually dissolved or been unimplemented. And what we think is that if you're going to spend the resources to implement an evidence-based program, that you implement it in the way in which it was designed to be implemented and proven to be effective, and that you stick with it, that you stick with the implementation of that program. So one example that we made in the report in terms of recommendations is that the Cure Violence model, which exists here in Wilmington under the name of Cease Violence, is an excellent program. It fits very well with what we've heard from the community about the violence here, which is the retaliatory violence, or what people call beefs, that take place. And when you look at gunshot detection data, you can see it. You see it pop up and go down, pop up and go down. And that's indicative of a situation where people are arguing and fighting, and they're shooting it out in the streets, and then it dies down. And a program like Cure Violence or Cease Violence can be extremely effective in responding to that type of a situation. But it has got to be supported in a way that makes them able to do their job. So what we note is that you've done a great job of hiring interrupters who match the competencies that are needed in the community to do that work. But what we found is that it's currently being implemented out of the Parks and Recs Department, which we have concerns about whether or not they are capable of operating in a 24/7 environment and being able to respond quickly to prevent violence. And so we can't wait until Monday to have an intervention or have somebody out on the streets, to have somebody help somebody find a job or get some counseling. We've got to have that immediately in order to be effective. And so that programs like that and others have got to be supported. They've got to be implemented the way they were designed, and they've got to be sustained over a long period of time in order to have the effect that we want them to have.
Police departments are only 1/3 of the criminal justice system. The fact is that, police investigate and make arrests, but then somebody has to be prosecuted, and then they have to go before court. What we found is there needs to be better communication between the Wilmington PD and the Attorney General's office. What we're recommending is that within 48 hours after, for instance, a homicide takes place, that there be meetings between the Attorney General's office and the PD to discuss the case and evidence, and that monthly they have meetings to go over the pending cases. But what we found was there was a difference of opinion on both sides. On the Attorney General side, to some extent, a belief that some cases were not properly prepared for prosecution. On the police department side, the belief that they had presented more than adequate evidence that wasn't accepted by the Attorney General's office. And we believe that the way you fix this is through communication. The way you fix this is by having meetings quickly after events take place so that the evidence can be put together and the criminals prosecuted. One of the things that we did notice about Wilmington PD is because of, one, the volume of crime and a lot of historic practices, that they are being pretty reactive to crime rather than proactive in reducing crime. And that comes down to use of technology. Most police departments currently are using software programs that do predictive policing and intelligence-led policing and analysis. And in fact, the Wilmington Police Department has a program called CrimeView provided by the state. What we found was that there's not enough people who are trained in its use, and that we are recommending that more people within the department be trained in the use of CrimeView, and that there be established an criminal analysis unit comprised of 2 police officers and 2 civilians. One of the things that is a trend in policing these days and a best practice is getting trained civilian analysts who spend a tremendous amount of time using these intelligence software programs to determine who's committing the crime, to help target the individuals, to do link analysis, to do predictive policing. We believe that creating this kind of unit will significantly help the operational units in reducing crime and arresting the perpetrators in the city. We're also recommending that a new position be established within the Wilmington Police Department, a Deputy Chief of Operations, and that the Deputy Chief of Operations will become the Chief Strategist for crime reduction after the Chief of Police, in holding weekly meetings. Right now, the Wilmington Police Department holds something called TAPS meetings, and they are primarily meetings that report what crime has taken place in the city. We believe that it is important that the Wilmington Police Department implement a ComStat-type program. And for those of you who are not aware of what a ComStat program is, it stands for Computerized Statistics. It's been used by major and small police departments around the country to hold people accountable, not for arrests, because it does count what you count. The number of arrests are irrelevant if crime continues to go up. So what a ComStat program does is, with the use of a criminal analysis unit, it would provide the Deputy Chief of Operations with crime trends within all of Wilmington, and then hold the commanders accountable not for arrests, but for reduction of crime, and also assisting them with additional resources to reduce crime. We believe this is a very important part of modern policing, and implementing it in Wilmington will help reduce crime significantly. We also looked at cameras. Downtown Vision is a not-for-profit that basically has 70 cameras around the city. There have been rumors that the cameras don't work. Jim will talk a little more about this, but they do work, although it's an old system. There's one person who looks at 70 cameras, which is very hard to do. We're recommending that a sworn police officer, maybe one on light duty, be assigned so that he could provide instant information to the PD to respond if they see something on the cameras. On a longer-term solution, we're recommending the establishment of a real-time crime center at the police department where cameras The intelligent software systems I described, the databases, and ShotSpotter would all enunciate in one location so that the police department could instantly respond to crime in progress or actually prevent crimes that they see before they take place and have all the information necessary to respond to that. There are software systems where you don't have to look at cameras, you can program the cameras to look for certain events, and when they happen, these cameras would alarm and alert the police to respond instantly. And that's not an instant solution, but that's a goal I think the PD should be looking at in the long term. But before that, assign somebody to downtown vision so that they can respond more effectively. From an equipment standpoint, one of the things we're recommending is that the PD implement the use of license plate readers. For those of you who are not aware of what license plate readers are, they're high-speed cameras on the back of police cars that read license plates, some of them 1,000 per minute, and they upload them to criminal databases. So they would find people who are wanted on arrest warrants, fugitives, stolen cars, unlicensed vehicles, pedophiles, and we believe this would be a force multiplier in helping the police department reduce crime significantly. They are not cheap, but there are federal funds available from both the Highway Administration and from some of the drug-related hider organizations that could fund this for the Wilmington Police Department.
Along those lines, we looked at how to leverage resources, in particular coordination with other agencies. And a couple of the recommendations we made are for closer coordination with probation and parole colleagues, both at the adult level and the juvenile level, and for collaboration not only at the leadership level of those organizations, but collaboration at the street level as well. What we'd like to see and recommend is that the chief have his counterpart from probation available. They have regular conversations about the status of their collaboration, about strategic initiatives that are being implemented. We'd like to see those probation and parole officers working very closely with law enforcement officers in the community to solve problems. At the same time, working together with prosecutors to review cases is critically important, as I think you have heard. And we also make a recommendation as Operation Disrupt is transitioned into the community stabilization team, should that recommendation be adopted. We make recommendations that the police officers be returned to the federal task forces as soon as possible, because currently they are not in those task forces, and the federal agencies can't keep their resources deployed here for long without the collaboration and support from the Wilmington Police Department. So we do make that recommendation. On the issue of cameras, and we heard so much from the community about the cameras and whether or not the camera system was effective. And so what we did at that point when we heard that, and going back to the articles, for example, we noted in our recommendations appreciation for the crime victims in Wilmington who have raised this issue, the Goins family in particular and others, who raised questions about whether or not there is video evidence that could be used to solve a case where they became a victim or a member of their family became a victim. And so we wanted to address that issue. We worked with the team at Downtown Visions. We both had multiple teams that went to Downtown Visions at different times to look at the cameras, eyes on, to see them operating. We also asked Downtown Visions if they had any way of knowing what cameras were working at any point in time, and we found that they do. At least 2 times every week, they fully assess the entire system, camera by camera, to make sure that it works by looking at the monitors that they observe all day long. They note any discrepancies or any issues, particularly if there's service that's needed, and they note which cameras are working and which are not. So we did a quick analysis based on all of the cameras that are there, and so that everyone is clear, Downtown Visions has responsibility for approximately 95 cameras. 25 of them in the downtown business area that are operated by Downtown Visions as a nonprofit organization. And under contract with the city, Downtown Visions operates or oversees about 70 cameras that are around the neighborhood. So of those 95 cameras, with the 2 different weeks that we asked to see status reports, at least 95% of the cameras, if I remember correctly, it may have been 92, were operational. Some of them may not have been optimally operational, so some of them may be in need of cleaning or in need of the ability to pan, or may have been black and white only, not color. But that's what you get when you have a system that is built the way this system was built, which is by adding a few cameras at a time by different people in different places. And so some of the cameras have internet-enabled technology, some of them do not. And this needs to be looked at very systematically before any money is put into expanding this system. We really have to take stock of what we have. Are the cameras here for purposes of deterring crime, or are they here for purposes of solving crimes, or is it both? And depending on what those answers are from the city and the community, we manage those processes very differently. We also have to look at coverage. So you can have 200 cameras in the city and have them still miss hotspots in key areas. That has got to be done very carefully. There are actual statistical measures that look at saturation rates of particular areas. That process has got to be done, and it's a strategic process that's not done overnight. But we did find that most of the cameras were working, and we reported on that and actually created a separate report in the back of our document where you can read about everything that we did to see which cameras were actually working and how to move forward. So the state, through Secretary Schiliro's office and Attorney General Matt Dent, I think, are working together on a proposal to examine this. And we do recommend in our report that that process move forward. It appears to be a very thoughtful process. At the same time, as Howard mentioned, we did find that the 70 cameras that are the responsibility of the city are only manned, if you will, excuse that phrase, are only manned by one person per shift. One person cannot possibly manage 70 cameras without the aid of sophisticated technology to tell them what screen to look at any one time. So that has got to be addressed. We do make a recommendation that the city increase that coverage by at least 2 people as soon as possible so that you can have not only better coverage, but also more coverage, because it's not currently covered 7 days a week. So that's a key issue. The other issue, as Howard mentioned, is there are at any time there are a number of police officers who are not able to work on the street. They have some sort of an injury or some other reason why they can't be on the street. That's a perfect opportunity to put someone in downtown Vigilant so that when they observe criminal activity, that police officer has the ability to radio that information direct to people that are in that community, as opposed to the way it works today, in which folks at downtown Vigilant have to make a phone call, as you or I would, to the law enforcement agency to let them know about a crime in progress. As you can imagine, what results from that process most often when they get there, the activity is gone on their arrival. And so having a more direct contact and a more direct relationship between downtown Vigilant and the police department is essential. And in particular, having someone take the lead for camera implementation and making sure that as cases are being investigated, that someone is checking to see if there's video evidence that could be used in that case. So these are all recommendations that we've provided in the report.
The other thing we looked at was retention and compensation. One of the problems is that Wilmington has some of the lowest paid police officers in the state. The state police earn more, the Newcastle County earn more. In fact, they have all the departments in the state. Wilmington's about 5 from the bottom. 5 from the bottom. So we are recommending a study of retention and salary, and we believe it is important because if you lose 10 or 12 officers a year to state police and to Newcastle County or other departments, you really are not getting a return on investment, and you end up becoming a training academy for other departments. So we think it's important to take a look at salary and retention.
The other area in terms of strengthening the police department that we identified was the issue of communication strategy. So in talking to the community and talking to the business community, we heard people say they weren't really quite sure exactly what the police department was doing to address crime in the community. Some did. Some had very good relationships with the police department and knew that, but not all did. And so what we recommend on communication strategies is the department look to be more formal in having a communications plan, how to do that they have a professional communications manager or public information officer, and a number of departments around the country have done that. And we recommend better engagement with the community generally, be that through advisory boards or some other function. But in particular, the one piece that's really important to talk about here is that we heard from the police department very clearly that they feel like they don't get information from the community about crimes that have happened. And so we looked at this issue very closely, and what we found is that this is really a two-part process. You have to have the mechanisms for people to be able to submit information to the police department, assuming that trust is there. that knowing that that information will be handled in the right way, that is a critically important piece of this process that comes under the heading of legitimacy that we talked about. So knowing that it will be handled in the right way, giving them the tools to do that. So currently what we see most often are phone numbers that say if you have information about this crime, you can call us. We do occasionally see a web address that says if you have information, if you'd like to submit a tip, here's the website. When you go to that website, it's not entirely intuitive about how to submit a tip. There are lots of options on that page. It's the website for the company that maintains that service. There's really not clear information there, assurances there that when you submit information, you are truly going to remain anonymous, and that's important. And so when we went to other departments around the country, which we didn't do as necessarily, you didn't necessarily ask us to do that, but we've done it through other work, we see in other places a very concerted effort on the part of the police department to reassure citizens that any information you provide will be anonymous. And on top of that, they make it very easy for you to submit that information. So in a lot of other places, and I've heard that this happened here for a period of time, but it just doesn't appear that it's happening today. In a lot of places, what you see is public service ads. You see decals on vehicles, very large decals in other places saying, here's how you text information to us about a crime anonymously. And there are very strongly worded assurances about the anonymity that's provided in that process. So we looked at, for example, Atlantic City, New Jersey, which more than doubled the number of tips that they received from the community by implementing this approach. And we also looked at Yonkers, New York, which did the same thing. In fact, Yonkers has a video, YouTube video that we linked in the report for you to look at, where they had someone from the police department talking about how things have changed so substantially as a result of taking these efforts. So really doing that outreach to the community to get information about crimes that have happened and giving them an easy process to do it is critically important.
And I mentioned before the Deputy Chief for Operations, we believe that this is a critical position in moving forward with intelligence-led and predictive policing. Just about every professional police department has somebody in charge of strategy, besides the Chief of Police, who's the overall strategist. But it is very important, we believe, that this position be filled, and we believe it should be filled pretty rapidly. What we've done pretty much is we've given you a 30,000-foot view of what the report looks like. The report is very detailed, very specific. We believe it is a roadmap for success. And I want to thank my partner here, Jim Birch, for working with us. And we think what we've produced, if it's paid attention to, and if most of it is implemented, will result in what all of us want, which is a safer, better Wilmington. Thank you.
Thank you again, both Jim and Howard. As I did mention, this is the first time that, as a formal presentation to the Commission, that we've had a chance to hear. So what I would like to do now is open it up to questions or comments that members of the Commission may have on the report and certainly on the presentation that was just made. So we'll start, Darrell, we'll start with you. Okay. Kathleen?
Sure, thank you. My question to the consultants is that you're the experts, and we now have your outstanding report, and we're going to take some more time to digest all of it because it's dense and excellent, quite frankly. Well, how do we make sure, as a commission, that your report comes to fruition? Are there ways that you can suggest to us, strategies you can suggest, that would assist the commission as we go forward toward implementation?
Well, what we have done in the past is, after the chief and the department have taken a look and digested the report, and they need to prioritize what's doable now, what's doable in the future, and then they need, in my opinion, they need to set specific goals and timeframes. And then from the commission standpoint, I think you, as a commission, need to determine when you come back and review this and get with the chief and the department, and if you require us to take a look at what's been accomplished, what works, what is viable, what is not viable. You know, just because we made a recommendation doesn't mean it's right. There are some that may not fit into the culture here. We don't believe that, but it's possible. And, you know, I think what's necessary to make sure that this just doesn't become another book on the shelf is that there be an audit and a review in a reasonable time frame to see what's moving forward and what's not.
So, thank you. And I know, Jim, you're going to talk to this as well, but what I heard from the community, what the commissioners heard from all of you, is that you have plan fatigue. I mean, you've seen a lot of plans, and a lot of plans end up on a shelf, and we cannot have that happen. I know the chief is intent on having that not happen, as we are, and so I'd like to hear how we as a commission can assist in that process.
Yeah, I think Howard's points are well taken, obviously. I think additionally, I think we're both very open to coming back in and sitting down with the commission, with the community, and talking through recommendations you may have questions or concerns about. There is also a role for technical assistance that we surely would make available to you. In addition to that, I think Wilmington is tremendously fortunate to be a part of the Violence Reduction Network, and we know that in a number of places in our report that the recommendations could easily be accomplished through VRN. In fact, we coordinated extraordinarily closely with VRN as a part of this process. So the city is engaged directly with the Department of Justice as a part of that initiative. We worked very closely with them throughout to make sure if we were going to recommend something that they would have the ability to help implement it. So there are a lot of things you'll see in this report where we say the police department doesn't have to pay for this. You can get this through the Violence Reduction Network or through an existing grant. So I think having the commission reconvene in some way, I understand it may not end today, but having that be a part of the process, and we're certainly happy to engage with that as well.
Thank you.
This is a huge report, and I wonder if we might ask you to come back soon, like in the next few weeks, and maybe after we've even had a chance to digest it, and the chief as well. And not that we're not prepared to accept your report tonight, but so we can, after thinking about it, ask you some questions in some more depth about the substance of what's in here. And if you're agreeable to coming back and letting us have one more meeting, that would be wonderful.
We'd be happy to.
Thank you. I think that tonight the consultants they've given us a lot of information to think about. And at this point, a lot of this information is probably a little bit overwhelming for a lot of people. But, you know, between the people that's in charge of the city and certainly in charge of the police department, you know, they can take the majority of this information and they can make it doable. So I wanted to point that out to you. And then I wanted to key in two different things, because I'm sure that by the time that all the other commissioners make a statement, they'll hit on some other topics. There's two key things that I want to talk about now that I think that is somewhat critical and should be discussed. The first thing is putting the lieutenants back on the streets. It's one of the recommendations that is coming out of your report, and I think that's going to be critical to the department moving forward. And I just want to throw that out there. The next thing is you pointed out the Deputy Chief of Operations, and I want to if you could give us share some more background with that. And I think that, you know, that in any agency, you have to have someone with their eye on the ball, the eye on the prize. And certainly I think that with all this information coming out, you have to have someone in an organization that's going to make sure that there's a crime strategy being planned for and executed. And I think that this person or that position could be critical in moving the department forward. So if you could just
You're exactly right. Any department needs a chief strategist. Needs somebody who is going to hold the command staff and the rank and file accountable for, just like in a business. You know, in a business, people are accountable for revenue. in police work, people should be accountable for crime reduction. And you have to have somebody in the department has to have an overall strategy. A strategy that says, these are the 10 criminal organizations in this city. We're going to target them, we're going to dismantle them, we're going to make the city safer by doing that. We're going to work with the prosecutors to see that that happens. You need somebody who says, when we roll out our police officers, from a police officer safety standpoint, they're going to know what the dangers are out there, what crimes are taking place, where the robbery patterns are, where the burglary patterns are, where the disorderly people are. They have to know that. We have not seen a lot of that substantively happening at roll call now. And part of that is by not having the kind of intelligence systems and information and data that you need in order to provide that. We know Chief Cummings recognizes that and is working on that, and that's part of this crime view system as well as a lot of other available systems. But it can't happen if somebody isn't there at the controls. And, you know, I led a police department a little bit larger. And, you know, one of the things that was clear to me is if a precinct commander didn't feel that somebody was looking over his shoulder to make sure that he was doing the right job, that we didn't get the kind of productivity that was necessary. And I don't mean in a negative way. We rewarded as many precinct commanders as we moved precinct commanders. But somebody has to be at the control saying there's accountability. You're an inspector, or you're a captain, or you're a lieutenant, because you're out there as a supervisor to make sure that what the business of policing is, which is crime reduction, is taking place. The Deputy Chief of Operations would have that responsibility at the same time that Chief Cummings is running everything else in the department. And of course, he would report to him.
My question is centered around funding, and you've made some reference to it through the VRN, and I'm sure you looked into some opportunities out there for the department to gain some funds from someplace to purchase hardware, software, and other items. Can you talk a little bit about that?
We did, in our review of monetary and operational resources, and that's one of the reports that you'll find in the back section of this report online, you'll see that we asked a lot about not only the city's budget for the police department, but also about grants that the city receives from federal sources and from state sources. And we cataloged that a little bit for you. We give you an idea of how much money is there. So the last couple of years, I think we cataloged $5 million that was available. We looked at how much was remaining available today to potentially be able to implement some of this. And you know there are often requirements with these grants. You can't always use every grant dollar for any purpose. It sometimes has to be done very strategically. But you know, in some pots of money, for example, in the technology area, there was as much as $2 million that might be available. Particularly for equipment and overtime, there was lots of remaining resources from federal and state grants. What we also pointed out is that even in this coming fiscal year, the Department of Justice has already signaled its intention to provide the city with another $230,000 through the Byrne Justice Assistance Grant Program. And that program has often been referred to at the federal level as the universal donor. It's a federal grant program that almost has no restrictions associated with it in terms of how you can use those dollars. The beauty of it is that those dollars can be used over a 3-year period, yet they come annually. And so you have the ability through Byrne JAG funds to be able to use that for things that you can't necessarily use city funds for. You know, the one downside to that is if you use it for personnel, when the grant runs out, you've got to sustain that. But it gives you a 3-year horizon to make that plan. And so if you know today what the department's attrition is, and we know what it is based on working with them, they can begin to use Byrne JAG dollars now to hire people that they may not have to pick up on the city payroll for another couple of years. And so being strategic in how you use those grant dollars is going to be critical moving forward. What we've tried to do is for every recommendation we've made, we tried to offer a place where you could potentially get those resources, if not generally through VRN. So license plate readers, for example, we said both HIDA and highway safety funds are known to provide support for that, as well as the Byrne JAG funds. We've also looked into whether or not the city could accept support from the business community. And so if members of the corporate community wanted to provide, for example, analytics support, one of the key needs of the department is the ability to do better crime analysis. If the corporate community has those resources to make available, we've found that the city's charter allows the city to accept those kinds of contributions. I'm sure there are requirements around that, but it can be done. So that tells you a little bit about what we looked at.
There was a lot of funds spent on overtime. How does that equate to the number of vacancies that this agency's discipline has experienced over the last year or two?
Yeah, thank you for reminding me to say that. It's critically important to point that out. The department today, I think, is at 286 in terms of smart staff. The level they should be at is the authorized level that they have, which is 320. When you operate with that kind of a deficit, you are absolutely going to have overtime. There's no question about it. That's a huge contributing factor to this issue. And so some of the recommendations that PRI has made is a different recruitment process.
Right. Some of the things that we're recommending is smaller, more frequent classes, because you can anticipate how many vacancies you're going to have. And if you had smaller classes at closer intervals, you would be able to fill those positions quicker. Plus, as people retire, the amount of salary that you're saving by putting new recruits in is also contributory to the amount of funds available to the city. So we believe that by having smaller, more frequent classes, that deficit can be reduced.
So if I may just hit that one more time. When the chief has to have people on the street, and you're down as many people as he is down, he has no choice but to spend overtime to fill those gaps. You can't tell the community we don't have anybody to do it. But he's got to do it. He's forced to do it. Not only that, with the crime conditions, when you have spikes in violence, he's forced to deploy even more. And with the deployment strategy, the way that it was, I think that is going to naturally cause some overtime expenditures as well. So the deployment is really essentially even across all three sectors. And so what we're recommending here with the deputy that we've talked about is the ability to flex and shift resources as needed so that you can try to reduce that overtime.
Okay.
Sure.
So, sorry. The 320, we talk about the ratio of police officers they have to citizens. Are you talking about the 320 or the 260?
320.
Yeah. Oh, so at capacity. We have one of the highest ratio.
Yes.
Okay. That's all.
But it's important to point out, too, that there are places like Camden, New Jersey, for example, that has more officers per capita. It's a smaller jurisdiction as well. So it's not that Wilmington's at the top of the list, but it is pretty close.
Well, the 260, where are we at nationally, right?
286.
280.
Look at 286, look at it with the authorized range.
320.
All right.
So you'd still be pretty high, 386.
Okay. All right.
If I could, one of the things we did talk a little bit about is how, and you mentioned it, but perhaps a little more detail, how we better coordinate between the state, the county, and Wilmington, in really in order to focus, resources onto this issue. Now, we have, I know the county is in 1 day a week. The state police did a number of years in Wilmington. But I guess my question is specifically, where do we look to better coordinate the crime reduction initiatives?
Yeah, we recommended that perhaps 2 Newcastle investigators work on a regular basis with the PD, which would be a very useful training exercise for them, as well as an intelligence exercise, because there is a lot of criminals who go between both areas. Jim, did you have that?
What we looked at was the number of homicides and violent crime in the state, and then looked down, and the majority of it in the state happens in the city and then in the county. So we talked about that there's more connectivity from an intelligence standpoint, as the commissioner said, on the violent crime cases between the DSP, state police, the county, and the city. We talked about having a joint task meeting once a month between the county and the city on that. and more information flow, whether it's in the narcotics area or in the violent crime area, between those, because the statistics are clear. It's happening in Newcastle County and the city of Wilmington.
Yeah, so I want to talk again about sort of how we can use this best, right? So my question is really not to usurp the chief's role in prioritizing. I'm asking sort of a slightly different question, which is sort of what could be done quickly, what will take longer, right? So there's sort of what's most important, and it sounded to me like maybe some of the analytic stuff was the most important. But that may also be the longer term.
Well, the analytic stuff is very important, and we believe putting the lieutenants back on the street is very important. We think using the GPS system, which now exists, is very important. It could be implemented quickly. The beginning of a change in the culture and philosophy of the TAPS meetings, we believe, can be done very quickly, even before you find a deputy chief of operations. So, because all of that relates to actual analytic crime reduction and deployment. And we think that by putting the lieutenants back, changing the TAPS philosophy, and tracking where the police officers are something that's really doable really quickly.
So based on the recommendations that BRI has provided, which considers the academy class completed and the 34 added to the mix, that gives you the ability to do a lot more than what you can do today. One of the things that we also recommend be done very quickly is the establishment of that community policing framework and putting those officers back in the community, deploying into hotspots. Those things can be done very, very quickly. I think there are gradations, if you will, of some of these recommendations. So crime analysis, for example, as Howard mentioned, we can change the way TAPS operates pretty quickly. But there may be other things that we're recommending, for example, the use of social network analysis, for example. That may be much harder unless the business community has the ability to step up and offer them assistance, or unless you have a partnership with Temple University, for example, and the Philadelphia Police Commissioner does, to make those things happen. So I think there are a number of things that you can do quickly, but I think it's critically important that you do the accountability and deployment pieces first, because that gives you the ability to do everything else. So it's a domino set in some ways.
Thank you.
One question I have for clarification. The Deputy Chief of Operations, is that in addition to the two inspectors that I already have?
Yes.
Okay, thank you.
First, I'd just like to say, in business we work with a lot of consultants, and what you were able to, the document you were able to create in such a short period of time, I think is a great tool for the chief and for the Wilmington Police Department. And I think you'd be very proud of the effort that you put forth. The one thing, though, that I saw that I think is missing, and we've talked a little bit about implementation, but also measurable outcomes. I'm wondering if that's something that you could work with the chief and with the department to come up with. We don't need an extensive list, but a list of measurable outcomes that can really make this work.
Absolutely. That is a great suggestion and certainly doable.
We have some of those that we've been working on it, but we simply ran out of time to clean up the list in the way that we want it, but we're happy to provide that to you after capital.
Anything else? Guzan?
I also want to thank you again, so much for this report. This was really a heroic effort on your part, and you really should be proud of this. And this is a great report, and I'm very glad, for the reception that it's been getting here. Rick asked my question about performance measures, going down the road here. But my other question sort of leverages off of additional meetings or additional actions beyond this report. And I heard you say that you would be willing to come back and talk about this in a few weeks. One of the question that I have is that is there any plans, and I'm not sure if this is an appropriate question, but are there any plans to do any specific briefings to, say the city council? I know that we have a few representatives here today, but they're not all here, and they might want a specific briefing about what is going to happen, or what this report is including.
for those of us who've been on this commission, I think that's really important to be able to do that, and I'm sure you guys would be willing to take a phone call from City Council. And certainly once we've had a chance to brief it, we'll be prepared to talk to them, as will the chief, about the recommendations here. But I think that's a very good point, and they should be certainly involved in the process.
Anything else from the commission? Okay. Just two things, and we'll open this up to comment, or if not, a motion. Under the resolution, you did what was expected by the 31st of March, and that is to produce a report. The next step, pursuant to the resolution, is to present that both to the governor and the General Assembly. In my view, and I think our legal counsel also has the same view, that this commission would then vote to accept the report for dissemination to both the governor and general counsel. So is there any comment or discussion on that? None.
Beyond that?
Well, the second part of that, in my view, and I'm going to give you just personally my view, I think next step has to be the Wilmington Police Department. I think that this is an awful lot to be thrown at them. Probably the first time the chief is hearing many of it. So at least from the vantage point that I see, I think we have to give them time to look at it, to understand, as Commissioner, you've said, what works, what may not work, for them to develop a plan based upon this report. And then when they're ready, and I don't know what kind of time frame that would be, Chief, but I do think that it would be very, very privileged to hear back from you on the reaction of that. It is a lot. I mean, it is a lot to do in a short amount of time, but I'll leave that to you to kind of put it into some kind of time frame. Although I do think that, time is important, but I think, in my view, the responsibility has to now shift to you guys to really look at it, understand how it would work, and perhaps based on that, we'll convene another meeting to hear back from you specifically on the recommendations made. I don't think it would be advisable to debate this in public before you've had a chance to digest it. That would be my recommendation.
I think we've already got a plan. I think we heard from them for our sake to come back in a couple of weeks to get a little more depth. And then I think, if possible, I'd like part of our plan going forward, if we could agree, to meet again with Chief Cummings, some weeks after that, to begin to hear about sort of what's been done, what they need, what's happening, and to move forward from there, sort of as we go along. But I think we, certainly continuing to meet in the near term for sure, to hear sort of how things are going and what assistance is needed seems to me to be a necessary part of what we do tonight and agree to do together.
Chief, I think Chief will be interested to hear your, as far as next steps.
I think we're real close to next steps. Again, I won't put a time frame on it right now. However, we've worked very closely with the consultants, and a lot of the recommendations that have been made are recommendations that can easily be implemented. Again, I won't give you a time frame, however, but we are ready to move on a lot of these recommendations.
I guess with that, I think to Drew's point and to Kathleen's point, to keep, I think, the initiative alive, so to speak, perhaps we'd look to meet within 2 to 3 weeks, just to hear, again, your reaction to it. Again, knowing that not all of it is going to be, be able to be, commented on by them, but at least an idea. Yes. Does that sound reasonable?
Absolutely.
Okay. So having heard that, we will entertain a motion to accept the report, and then we'll talk about a meeting in 2 to 3 weeks to hear back from Chief Cummings.
I'll move to accept the report.
Do we have a second?
Second.
All in favor? Aye. Is anyone opposed? Okay, thank you, and the report is accepted. Based on Chief Cummings,